What does it take to create a vibrant, thriving life? First, the sad news is that Thoreau was right. Most people are leading quiet lives of desperation, lacking in meaning, fulfillment, and vitality. But we choose more. We choose to create extraordinary lives. And the Art of Vibrant Living show entertains you with inspiration, empowerment, and education to create your life into a masterpiece. It's time. Let's vibe up. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the show. I am Daniel Aaron, your host. This is the Art of Vibrant Living show, which is dedicated to you living your most vibrant, amazing life. And I'm super excited for today's show, especially my guest today is a phenomenal guy. I'll tell you a little bit, but I'll give you more opportunity to hear from him directly in a moment. Remember, your destiny, your possibility, your potential, and I would say your birthright, maybe even obligation, is to truly live a vibrant, amazing, thriving life. And to whatever degree that's not happening now, or even is happening, the question I invite you into is, how can I grow into that further? That's what this show is all about, is yes, some entertainment, more though empowering you. I ask you to please listen, watch, and take at least one thing. There'll be about 486 gems here. I know it. Take one thing that you can say, yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm going to apply that in my life today. If you want any help with that, please reach out, and I would love to support you with creating an even more amazing life. Now, today's guest, Kellan Fluckiger. Pronunciation, so, maybe. We'll find out. Amazing, phenomenal coach, writer, author, 19 books, musician, speaker, who had a completely different life, so different from what he's created now in the last years. And I'm not going to go into a whole lot, just to say I've been blessed to meet him, become friends, and be a student to learn from him. So I'm so excited for y'all to get this experience. And I'm going to leave it to him to tell more of how he came to be who he is, because it's a truly phenomenal story. Kellan, thank you so much for being with us.
Daniel, thank you for having me. And first of all, I want to honor you doing a podcast or a show like this, live stream. And I was just looking at all the places, Roku, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, Schmitter, X. Well, we got to change that logo, right? It's X now. Anyway, all those places that you've got, all that's a labor of love, and it's a lot of work. And it just tells me about your heart and tells me about who you are. And I want to honor you and be grateful to you for the work that you're putting into spreading the message that you just described, which I support fully. So thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for saying that, and a pleasure. And it hasn't been lost on me that my tagline in some way is, the art of vibrant living, and your website, as we see there, is your ultimate life. Clearly we got some viewpoints in common.
No question about that. Your ultimate life. Everybody has a series of interconnected dreams that defines their ultimate life. And I just call it a life of purpose, prosperity, and joy that you create by living into the true divine and powerful nature that you have.
Yeah, well, no argument there. I love it. I love the way you say it. And, I have the advantage here of knowing that you didn't always think that way, and you didn't always live that way. And you had a fairly dramatic shift of your life. So would you be up for sharing with our audience a little bit about what happened there, how that transition occurred?
Of course. I I was raised in a two-parent home that didn't look like, broken house or poverty or whatever. I mean, it was kind of lower middle class, but we never lacked for anything. But it was very unusual in one way, and it was fanatic in the context of religion and behavior. And there was a lot of discipline that today would be felony child abuse. And I remember stories, lots of them. And one of them was like, even as late as in high school, I got dressed last in the locker room because I didn't want anyone to see that I was black and blue from the beatings. And so, that kind of stuff was my whole life experience up until I left home at 17. And what it did, how it left me, was just convinced that I was not good enough and never would be. And I didn't really think maybe getting out of that would, you turn away from both what happened to you and religion and all that. And I didn't. I kind of had the feeling that my whole life purpose was to prove to my mom, who was the principal administrator of the discipline, that I was okay and get her approval, which of course I never did. I never will, but I'm okay with that now. That went on for 35 years, from 17 till I was 52. The consequences of living in severe depression was a lot of self-sabotage, a lot of self-loathing. I was blessed with some brains. I knew how to make money, and I believed that if I did enough of that, I would, get back in the good books. So I created a lot of financial success and career success, but then I didn't believe I deserved it, so I would sabotage it. I'd like literally do things to get in trouble and to get sabotaged. I ended up doing that with relationships and with jobs. And by the time of the transition that you talked about, which was August of 2007, 16 years ago now, I was back at the top of my career. I was making so much money that my $3,000 a week cocaine habit didn't matter. And I was single again for the third time. And I had 4 of my 10 children living with me. 3 were grown up and married, and 3 were living with, it's embarrassing a little bit to say one of the exes, but it is true. And that was who I was. And in one night on Friday in August of 2007, I came home from work and was getting ready to go out and party for the weekend. The kids were all teenagers and had friends and took care of themselves. That's not how I should have done it, but that's who I was at the time. And when I got ready to go out, I had this feeling, this compulsion to turn on the television. Now that sounds like nothing, except I didn't watch TV. And the funny part was I picked up the remote and I looked at it and it was like, ooh, I don't know how to turn this on. I realized I never watched it and I didn't know how to turn the television on. So I asked one of my daughters, my 16-year-old, and she punched some buttons and, threw the remote at me, dipweed, and it landed on a program that I'd never heard of. And I don't know if it's still on or not, but it was a reality TV show called Intervention, which is a reality TV show about families who stage professional interventions with, counselors or priests or whatever for busted loved ones. So I started watching it, and the protagonist was a high-ranking executive with a cocaine problem. And I was shocked, and I watched about 10 minutes of a lot of things really similar to my life and got mad, turned it off, said, I'm not going to watch this crap. So I walked around the house for a little bit and got ready to go. And then I was just compelled internally to turn it on again. And this time I knew how. And the show started over. And no, I didn't have a recording device. And no, it wasn't on the schedule. And no, it can't do that. I understand, but it did. And it freaked me out. I'm like, holy crap. I guess I'm supposed to watch this. So I sat down and watched it. It went badly. The guy yelled at his family, swore he didn't have a problem. He stomped out of the intervention. You know how that goes. But anyway, that freaked me out. It freaked me out enough that I didn't go out to party. I went to bed. When I went to bed, I went to hell. And what I mean by that is quite literal. It felt like I was somewhere out of body. It was in a dark room. It was kind of like a theater, and I could see, kind of a stage and stuff there, and I could hear things. And the scenes that were playing on the stage were all focused on suffering. And they were intense. And it was suffering that had been inflicted on me all through my childhood, up through all the suffering I had inflicted on other people as a liar and a drug addict and a lousy spouse and, all the things, mistakes that I had done. And the level of suffering was intense beyond description. And it went on for what seemed like an eternity. After a long time, I heard a voice, and it simply said, "It is enough." I woke up and was disoriented because the sun was shining in the window, and the windows in my house faced west. I got up and realized that it was 5 o'clock Saturday afternoon. So I'd been somewhere for nearly 18 hours. I realized at that point that I had been invited to change, but I had no idea how to do anything. I'd never really sought any help. I had never really opened up and talked to anyone. I had assumed everything was my fault and I sucked. And if I just get my crap together, it'd all be fine. And so I used that whole rubric of self-loathing all those years. But I knew that I was done and something had to change. So I threw away $1,000 worth of substances that I had laying around, because I always did, and I quit cold turkey that day. Now, that first part was a miracle. It got me sober, but it didn't do anything at all about how I got there, which was the depression and the self-loathing and not good enough and all of that sort of stuff. That was part 2 of the divine intervention. And that went on Monday. I went back to work, and I knew kind of I had to get out of that and start life over, but it was all kind of a lot. So when I went back to work, in the position I had, I got a lot of free stuff, free tickets and to concerts and to hockey games and box seats and, some pretty expensive stuff, not bribery level, but pretty nice stuff. So one of the things I got was a pair of $1,000 tickets to see a Yo-Yo Ma concert. Now, if you know classical music, you know who that is, and if you don't, you don't. But in the classical world, that's way up there. So I thought, this is amazing. I'm going to go. But of course, I had no one to take. As like I said, I was single for the 3rd time and not even remotely interested in relationships. So I asked in the groups that I managed who likes classical music, and somebody in one of the groups said, "Well, I do." It was a woman I knew. I mean, I knew all the people that worked for me. And I asked her, "Well, have I ever given you anything before?" And she said, "No." I said, "Okay, fine. See you there." Gave her the ticket. We met at the venue. The concert was spectacular. And now, as of the date of the concert, you got to know I'm now 2 weeks stone cold sober. Halfway through the show, which was astounding, I had this feeling come over me that I recognized from earlier. And this voice said to me, "You need to marry this woman." And I freaked out, because I thought, no way, no way. I've ruined that 3 times. I don't know how to do this. Not happening. But anyway, so later that night, we were backstage, because the reason they were so expensive tickets, it was backstage passes and the reception and all that stuff. So in the backstage, we were at the festivities, and the voice came back and said, comma, "And you need to tell her tonight." And then I really flipped out, because there were 2, probably more than 2, but there were 2 really obvious problems. One, I didn't know if she was in a relationship. Like, I didn't know that. And 2, she worked for me. I mean, I could be she called the cops. I could be arrested for harassment or whatever. So I argued with my voice furiously, but you don't win those arguments. So I did. And it went about like you would have expected. "Are you insane?" And she left. We hadn't come together, so she left. And the good news is that she wasn't in a relationship, which I didn't know. And the second piece of good news is she didn't call the cops or HR or anything like that. Over the next 2.5 weeks, she had her own set of experiences that I wasn't part of. And about 2.5 or 3 weeks after the concert, I resigned the position that I was in, walked away from millions of dollars of contracts. She left her entire career, and we walked off into the sunset together. And in about, next month in December, we're going to celebrate our 16th wedding anniversary. Now, as amazing as that story is, the real power is that she was literally the angel with a soul contract to help me learn how to be a person, to help me learn to tell the truth, to help me learn to have a friend and to be a friend. Things that I had never dared to know or learn or been able to have in my whole life. And we didn't know each other very well, but we launched into that thing because of how confident we were that it was the right thing to do. And the funniest thing, or the most interesting thing, is her name is Joy. And you can't make this stuff up. And so that was the beginning, the invitation to change my life.
Wow. It is amazing on so many levels, and entertaining, surprising, miraculous. and so a couple questions around it. One is the first part, divine intervention, part one, right? The intervention, and then I can picture that as a play or a movie, of course. Um, when you describe the part of going to hell, right, the immediate association I get is, well, we're coming up to the into the season here, A Christmas Carol, right, and the ghosts of Christmas. Did it feel like that in some way?
I called it hell because the suffering was so intense. It was unbearable. It was intense to witness the suffering that had been inflicted on me, and then the remorse and horror at the suffering I had inflicted on others. I mean, as a drug addict at the level that I was, and cocaine was the favorite, but there was just all kinds of stuff and all the lies and hiding and duplicity and the destruction of other people's hearts and everything that had gone with it. So hell is the only way I can describe it. I didn't see fire and brimstone or demons dancing with pitchforks, but I cannot imagine any hell. The intensity of suffering, of remorse, of compassion for my little self, and remorse is my grown-up self, and sadness for the people who I had harmed in all those ways, trust and betrayal and all that stuff. So I call it hell because of the intensity of the experience.
Hmm. And I mean, I don't know if you can say this because it sounds like you were in a different dimension in a sense, but what do you think was actually going on? How did that happen? I mean, you must have considered it, right?
I felt out of body. So I felt like I was somewhere, and it was literally almost 18 hours. And so the physical symptoms when I woke up, I was back in my bed, although not how I had laid down. I was upside down, backwards in the bed, and the bedding was so wet that you could wring it out, an impossible amount of fluid, not to be accounted for by any, bodily function. I mean, sometimes when people get drunk, they pee the bed, or you sweat if you have a fever. I've done all those things, and there was no explaining soaking wet. So I have no idea how that happened. But those are the physical sensations. When I woke up, I felt completely exhausted from the experience, but at the same time in wonder and awe that I had witnessed such an extra dimensional activity. So I have no idea where I was. I can speculate and make up stuff, but that's the physical reality of the experience.
Yeah, wow. Okay. So, and you described it as an invitation, which implies like it's clearly got your attention, right? And it was extremely striking, but you didn't say it was a command. So, what was it like for you? Did you have a moment there of saying like, well, am I going to accept this invitation? Was it obvious? What was that part of the process like for you?
Thank you for saying that. I use invitation because you listening, you, Daniel, me, Kellan, and you listening, you know what I'm talking about when when I say invitation, the nudges, the feelings that you ought to do something, but nobody's going to come and make you do it. Nobody puts your hand to the plow or the computer keyboard or opens your mouth and says the things you somehow know you're called to do. So invitation is the word because it leaves the truth to be discussed, but the truth that you have to go do it. So the invitation was stark. It is enough. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't anything. It was a statement from the center of the universe. It is enough. And I knew in the way that you can only know things in that kind of stuff, something has got to change. This is it. And I knew I had to do it. It wasn't going to do itself. There was no magic about the change involved. I had to go work on myself and go to counselors and start learning to tell the truth. And first couple shrinks I saw probably thought I was a nutcase. I didn't tell the truth to them either. Like I didn't even know how to have a conversation honestly about what had gone on in my life for the past 35 years, where I hadn't gotten any help or advice or talked to anybody at all. I just sort of lived in this isolated way. So I say invitation so that I can explain that it was an invitation, and yours are too, that you feel. I assume the reason mine were so loud is because I was so deaf. We have those invitations and feelings all the time, and I needed a 2x4 or two. And what that tells me is this: if there was ever a poster child for somebody that should have been abandoned at the bottom of the canyon, I was it. The battlefield behind me was a mess, and that doesn't even begin to describe it. And so what I know is if the divine, if our creator would come in that circumstance and offer an invitation, which implies there is a place to go, which implies there is a path out, then there is nowhere, nothing that you have been through, nothing that has passed. I was 52 when this started. So it doesn't matter what's happened before or where you are now. Those feelings, those nudges, those 2x4s, whatever they are in your life, they're real. They're not taunting. They're possible. And that's the meaning and the sort of framing around invitation.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, one of the quotations that came to mind for me as you were speaking about it is Lazarus said, "If you can hear the whispers, you don't need to hear the screams." Right, and I've described the awakening that I experienced, very different though in its own way, as dramatic, as being a 2x4 upside the head, divine 2x4, and thinking for myself like, wow, I was so clueless, and that I needed that kind of whack in order to get my attention. And I always hold this belief that for any of us, if we, well, there's that, it's kind of a cliche, if somebody knows better, they do better, right? Which, I'm sure there's a truth to that, though I think more accurate might be if we feel the consequences more, we tend to do more. There's this, it's a bit silly, but a movie scene that I love from the movie Powder, right? And have you seen that movie?
I have not.
Okay, so there's this hilarious scene, very unusual spiritual character in the movie, and he's in a very cliche Midwestern scene, and he ends up going on a hunting trip with all these guys, and they're very guys hunting, killing, and one of the guys shoots a deer, and the deer's on the ground, and it's twitching and dying, and it's, for me watching it, it was heartbreaking to see this animal suffering this way. And then one of the kids in the group says, well, is it in pain? And the guy who was like the leader of the kids group says, no, it's just nerves, don't feel anything. And then this unusual divine character whose name is Powder, he puts one hand on the deer and then puts one hand on the man that says, no, it's just the nerves. And suddenly the man feels everything that the deer's feeling, and it's almost like he has a seizure. And then from that moment on, his life completely changes. And so, like, what I think of in terms of your divine intervention part one is that the key would have been that you felt all of that, including the suffering that you inflicted. Does that make sense?
It does make complete sense, and that may well be right. That the intensity of the suffering made me know I never wanted to experience that again in any way, shape, or form. It made me remorseful beyond my ability to express for what I had done. And it did not make me angry for the stuff that had been inflicted on me, although that was as intense. That's interesting because I didn't feel bitter, angry, or any of that in that context, but it filled me with compassion. But the intensity of the suffering was beyond anything I have the ability to describe.
Wow. Okay. So let's go to this part, because you said a couple times about telling the truth, that you didn't have much capacity to tell the truth prior to that, and that as you started to learn how to live anew, a part of that was learning to tell the truth. What does that mean to you, and how is that relevant to your evolution?
When I was little, I lied all the time to protect myself from, punishment and so forth. What I learned from that is that I could create my world. I was blessed or cursed with a really, really good memory, and so I never got, like, caught in lies. I was able to just go through life creating things and saying whatever I wanted, and I realized at one point, a few years before that happened, that my life bore no relationship to the truth. I mean, I had a real job, I made real money, I did real stuff and did it well and got paid well, but my inner life had no like I sometimes could hardly tell the difference between what I said and what really happened in situations in terms of description and just all of that stuff. So I had to come to terms with this habit that I had created. And sometimes I use the term pathological liar, and I don't know what the actual definition of that is, but I lied all the time. There wouldn't be a day that go by that I didn't tell at least 30 or 40 or 50 shades, and sometimes completely different, and didn't think anything about it. I went through life creating things as I went along, saying whatever I thought people needed to hear so that life functioned like I thought it was supposed to. And I learned to undo that, that there was safety in truth instead of danger. And that I know is no longer required to fabricate my reality. And it's very difficult to describe the extent to which that was true. And the unpeeling of those layers didn't happen all at once. It was a very laborious, just in terms of time and effort process, to come to a place of telling the truth to myself, to those around me, and just living in a place of true instead of made up. And so that was a very stark difference and very important because, in our coaching business, like you can't make progress. Let's put it this way. The degree of progress that anybody can make in any area they're working on is directly proportional to the degree of truth they're willing to embrace. And that was a principle I had to learn for myself in that process.
Mm, powerful. There's a lot we could unpack with that. I'll skip over one track though and stay on the same general direction. I remember in my early 20s, I came across a book called, what was it called? Radical Honesty. And the subtitle was something like Telling the Truth Will Change Your Life. Brad Blanton. And I remember reading this book, and I came up from a family situation, maybe a little bit like yours. Certainly, honesty was never part of the equation in any of our family. The law of the land was sarcasm. That was sort of the best of it. And so I read this book, and what he advocated in the book is tell the unedited truth all the time. And if anybody else has a problem with that, that's their problem, not yours. And and so for me, that was so revolutionary, like just the idea, like you can actually just tell the truth. And and so I decided I'll take it on as an experiment. And for me, it was kind of like a pendulum swing because, like you, I had learned to create what I wanted by lying all the time. And so the pendulum swung over here, and I was like, all right, I'm going to really try this on and be honest. And I also injured a lot of relationships with my clumsiness around that. And part of what I learned is maybe that's a pendulum swing where honesty is essential, although caring and the way one expresses honesty maybe is involved or valid. So, as I say all of that, does that relate in any way? What can you say about that?
It's 100% true. Some people think of radical honesty as when someone says, "Does this dress make my butt look fat?" You say, "Yep, that's absolutely the truth." And that may be, quote, radical honesty, but there's 100 other ways to express things without lying, where you're misleading. And so that's just the silly example. And I think of that one because I used to work with a guy whose wife asked him that, and he told that story at work. And I've never been in a relationship where that question was actually asked, but it's cliche, and you can tell the truth. You can tell the truth and be in truth, and how you tell it, if you're in love with the person, if you're telling the truth that you don't really like something, it's not my favorite thing, or I don't want to do that, I'm not able to do that, declining an invitation to do something or help someone or go somewhere or anything. There's 100 ways to do it, and you're not required to, at any time, to lie, and you're not required to organize your life around other people's needs, but you are, if you're striving to be the very best human you can, obligated, if you will, or it's elevated to a place where you consider how you express and the consequences of how you express whatever it is you're thinking. And another piece that comes to mind about that is truth is, you know, your opinion, my opinion isn't necessarily the unvarnished truth. My opinion is my opinion, and the truth of my opinion is X. But that doesn't, lots of things that I've learned about my opinion is my opinion. I do not possess the capacity of the creator to own truth. I don't own it. I have an opinion. I have experiences. I have what I believe and know myself. But learning to navigate that in a way that is compassionate and powerful is possible and liberating.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think there's a saying I learned many years ago that if you want the truth, just let go of your opinion. And somehow I think that the sentiment of that is especially important these days where we got so much polarization going on. Um, and I think you pointed to something in the way you said that, which is, well, it kind of comes down to what do you want, right? What do you want to create in your life? How do you want your life to be? Um, so
100%.
what else then would you share about this process? Because I love that you had this like stark invitation. You knew you had to change. You went cold turkey, but you also didn't know how to live the life that you were offered, right? And so, what were some of the keys for you in learning? Telling the truth, obviously, was one. What else?
Well, Joy and I didn't know each other very well. And
Mm.
so when we started, we both knew that this was crazy. We both knew we didn't know each other very well. I was honest with her ahead of time about, the extent of my addictions and things, but that is just one little facet of life. So we had to learn who we were and to get along and all the things that you have to learn. And that took us, 2 or 3 or 4 years. Um, but what we did, because it was so crazy, is we just made a deal. And we said, okay, this is crazy. We both understand that it's crazy. And if we're going to do this, then this is ride or die. Because I said, I'm not doing this again. So I'm all in, period. No matter what. And we agreed that was how we were going to approach this. That commitment was powerful, to say the least. It was the foundation. So when things were not as they should be, and there were difficulties and there were arguments and conflicts of opinion, and the process of me learning, like 3 or 4 years it took me I had to begin seeing counselors and find people. And like I said, I ruined the first couple counselors because I didn't know how to tell the truth to them either. And by ruin, I don't mean I ruined them, but there was no possibility of growth there. And finally I began to learn what to do and how to just be vulnerable. And I have this going on. Well, here it is, instead of trying to have the answers also, because part of my brokenness was thinking everything was my fault and I was supposed to fix it. So I approached even counseling sessions with, this, and this, and here's the answers. And I'm sure that the shrinks and people thought I was nuts. And the truth is, I didn't even know how to get help. So there was a process of professional help. There was a process of trying to ask myself, what am I going to do now? I'd lived my whole life at the script of what success meant, who to be in the context of trying to get approval in the prescribed way from my mom all those years. And, I had to experiment with what is it even going to be? And gradually, in the first 3 or 4 years, I finally figured out that the transformation that is happening and, the invitation, the transformation, the changes, the choices were a valuable thing. And that's when I was drawn to, the coaching, the idea of becoming a coach or it, uh, getting into self-help or personal development business and all the rest, because I began to see really clearly, okay, this process has been really hard and have required a lot of work, a lot of change in how I view myself and God and spirituality and relationships and everything. And so it gradually dawned on me after about 4 years, probably starting in 2011, that I wanted to do this work. And so I began to do that and use it as two things. One is a development process for myself, and then to offer clumsily at first, but to offer assistance to others who were making changes in their own lives, having come to a place of dissatisfaction, yearning to get up to the next podium. You can describe it a lot of ways. In sports, it's get to a championship. In music, it's get to the next concert stage or go to the next level up. It's whatever it is. But the process that I went through brought me gradually, as I learned to get rid of old stories and things that I used to hold as true, get rid of those things and then adopt better, more functional points of view and views about people and everything else. So it was a growth process, and truth I picked was one of the big ones. Another huge one was learning to love myself.
Hmm.
People ask all the time when you go to any kind of rehab or, a recovery facility, what's your drug of choice? And I used to, although everything was handy and fine, it was cocaine was the big one. I finally realized that my drug of choice was self-loathing. I needed to hate myself. And so every time I created big success, which I did over and over again, I needed to wreck it because I didn't deserve to be here. That wasn't conscious thinking, but that's how I behaved. And so I finally realized the drug of choice had nothing to do with the substance. Whatever substance was handy. Yeah, cocaine was the big one, and $3,000 a week is a lot. But it wasn't the substance. It was the need to prove that I sucked as bad as I believed I did.
Wow. And then there's a lot of talk in the worlds we inhabit about self-sabotage or undermining beliefs, uh, and believing I sucked, not loving myself, self-sabotage. Uh, it's something I don't actually hear very often. I don't hear people speak about it in that way, though I think it's probably a lot more common than we might realize. So, and I appreciate the way you said that, and as you did, I reflected for myself, like, yeah, there's a lot of my life where I really, even though I didn't see it and probably wouldn't have admitted it, was really disliking myself, and I've had confrontations with that for myself even recently. Um, so, I guess two questions. Then, how did that change for you, and for anybody that's watching with us that goes, "Oh shit, maybe I'm doing that." What would you advise?
I would advise to take the stigma out of it. I can tell you, you are doing it because if you really loved yourself like God loves you and you're a divine being, think about this. You have genealogy, you have your parents, your mom, dad, grandma, grandpa. The genealogy of your spirit can be written on a single line. So, since that's true, you're the actual creation of a divine, all powerful being who loves, who is love, total all that, then loving ourselves is a divine right, and it is an obligation because it's only in that state that we can begin to accomplish what we can. And to love ourselves is a holy thing. It is a blessed thing. I'm not talking about self-indulgence, I'm talking about honoring and loving yourself. And that's true even if you've been where I've been or worse, and all of the things that come with that. And that sort of story drives us to hate ourselves. Well, I did this and I did this and I did this, therefore I'm unworthy and therefore I suck. And if anybody really knew whatever it is that you're afraid that they know, then they would hate me. Okay. There isn't even a conversation there. Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. You have no idea. But the truth is, what you were doesn't matter. There's a line in Shakespeare in the play As You Like It. There's a brother and another brother. And the older brother hates the younger brother. And in fact, hates him so much he kept trying to kill him because the younger brother was more successful and more liked. So his older brother kept trying to kill him. And one day, the older brother got in trouble. Something happened, and I don't know the whole story. But the younger brother came to his rescue and saved his life, even though his older brother had been trying to kill him. And later in the play, there were a couple of ladies talking to the older brother saying, and so the older brother completely changed. No more this and that. He completely changed who he was being. And there was some ladies talking to him and said, aren't you the guy that was trying to kill your brother, blah, blah, blah? And he'd said, here's the immortal line, 'twas I, 'tis not I. And that is the heart of change. So it doesn't matter where you start. What matters is your direction and your trajectory. So if you can start today. Today you can start and move in a new direction. And that is a choice we all get to make. And we need whatever help we need. We can't do this alone. We're not designed to do it alone. So that choice is what I had to make. And I had to come to the book called Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It. And it's came out of a TED Talk. Talks about an entrepreneur in Silicon Valley that was so depressed he was going to kill himself. And the only thing he did is start saying, I love myself. I love myself. And the story's kind of funny. And the TED Talk was so moving and powerful that everybody insisted he write a book. And the first one's really thin. And it has a picture of a silhouette on the front with a guy with what looks like a gun to his head. There's now a second edition that's got more commentary and it's thicker. I have both of them. But it is a simple act of allowing the truth of who you are to begin to manifest. That doesn't mean you pretend any mistakes away. That doesn't mean we shouldn't fix what we can. That doesn't mean any of that. What it means is you start today and you move in a new direction. It also means that you choose to be compassionate to yourself when you make mistakes. And that at least brought me to where part of my saying that I live in is I am forgiveness. I hold no judgment, anger, or loathing toward anyone for anything, including myself. And that guiding, aspiration, I'm not pretending to be perfect, but that guiding aspiration informs every conversation, no matter what anybody has said or done or not said or not done. They are where they are. And I choose because I can to love them anyway and to not carry the weight of either anger toward them or loathing toward myself, any at all, ever, zero. And the interesting thing about that is that it's so light. Life is so light and energized and free. And there is so much to do when I'm not carrying the rocks of self-loathing or retributional, I don't even know if that's a word, but retributional anger towards somebody that did thus and such. I don't need it. I can't fix it anyway. I've done everything I can to clean up the mess from the past. I don't know if other people have cleaned up their mess, but justice is not in my hands. There's a legal system. Maybe that works. Maybe it doesn't. I know there's a bigger system. And you know what? I don't pull those levers either. And it's not in my backpack. Yay.
Yay, I'm with you. That's beautiful. A couple things that come to mind as you say that. I remember when I was 29 years old, and it was shortly after I had that divine whack upside the head, and I realized also, like, holy moly, I do not know how to live what I saw, what I experienced. So there's nothing more important than figuring that out. And that's when I
Mhm.
got obsessed with personal and spiritual development. Few years into that process, and I was doing all kinds of work in this realm. And I remember my mother writing me a long letter, handwritten letter, with the conclusion like, "When are you going to get a real job?" Right? I could have any job in the world. She would totally support me as long as it was a doctor or a lawyer. Right? So, but in whatever my version of being a coach was at that time, did not square with that. But I remember so clearly feeling like there's nothing more important than figuring this out. Whether it's learning to tell the truth, love myself, and I'm still learning all of those things. Um, so I want to talk in a minute about what you're up to now, because I know the lightness that you just described. Part of what that's created in you is a creative freedom and a proliferation of value and love into the world. And I think, and you tell me if this is accurate, part of what's facilitated that is your own personal truth and commitment document, manifesto, whatever we call it. And we've talked about that in other ways. I know you've talked about it. I've talked about it before. I have my own version of that. But what is that for you? Because some people may not be conversant with even the concept.
So here's the idea. The idea is we are raised to have certain values and certain path through life. In my youth, it was grow up, get a job, go to work for a company, work there 30 or 40 years, get married, have a family, do good, be a decent person, get old and croak. And that's kind of a good life. And then there are a few outliers that did little variations of that, and then a few weird ones that did whatever. But that was sort of what you do. And if you deviate from that, you're not okay. Well, so if you adopt those things that are given to you, then what you've done is you've sold your soul, for better or worse, for that truth. What occurred to me after the divine interventions and the complete radical shift of my life. I mean, I walked away from everything I'd done for 30 years. That wasn't a trivial thing. I'd been in that career for 30 years. And I started all over again. And I started thinking, okay, if that can change at that radical level, who am I? Who am I? Like, I'm not going to define myself in terms of job, consultant, accountant, lawyer. I'm not going to do that. Who am I? And at the basic level, a document is like a personal manifesto, a personal constitution. For me, it's a contract between me and God. I declare who I am. And some of the statements in there are factual, like I am a son of God. There's nothing I can do to change that. That's it. But having it in my statement reminds me. So when I read my statement, which I do every day and I have it memorized, I am that. It changes how I look at everybody and how I look at myself and the choices I make and the things I do with my time and things I say yes to and no to. Some of the statements are aspirational. So one of them is, for example, I am my word. I speak only truth. I do what I say. I am who I seem with no camouflage, duplicity, or guile. And guile's an old word that means phoniness. So that is aspirational because I'm not perfect. So some of the statements are factual and some are aspirational, but I put them together in a string in a document that is now several pages long and describes different facets. But it is mine. I don't share it with anybody except in this last book I wrote, Living with Purpose and Power. I did put them in there just as ideas because that's what the book's about. But they're just a contract between me and the divine. And when someone says, well, why that? You're not that. How can you say that? The answer is really simple because I said so. Like, I don't need anyone's permission. I don't need anyone's agreement, neither do you. This is a declaration of yours of who you are in the world, how you walk through the world, how you show up, and so I am my word, I tell the truth, I am who I seem, I do what I say. Those are things that simply represent who I have declared myself to be. So that is a living document that I use, I memorize, I say it, I breathe it. It is my personal constitution. And because I wrote it and I chose every single word in there, I'm committed because I said so. And I didn't put anything in there that wasn't like resonant to my soul. So that is the document, and the companion thing with it. Because lots of people go to some seminar and they write, I am a wonderful, compassionate, kind, caring person, husband, wife, father, da, da, da. And then they don't do anything with it. It just goes in the shelf or the computer. And, it isn't anything. It felt really good at the time, but it doesn't have power in their lives. So the companion activity is something I call a morning routine or morning ritual that involves a lot of parts. But one of them is to recite in full power and sometimes in a dramatic reading the words of that document to light the fire of my determination and commitment on purpose every day. And if things need to be tweaked or changed so that it lights the fire of commitment, then I do that. But I want to use every minute of my life to do the things that I choose to do. Instead, they're represented in the document. And then my daily morning creation process is like a warm up for a sport at the Olympics. It's what I do every morning so that I am at peak performance and in flow all day. Why? Because I choose it, because I said so.
Beautiful. Now, this is, I think, a ridiculous question in a way. I still want to hear your response, though. So, get yourself into peak performance every day, so that you can create what you want, use every minute. How does it make you feel? What's the difference for you in terms of if you do it or don't do it?
When I first started all this stuff, I used to have the same trouble I had getting up. Oh, I hit the snooze button, don't want to get up, don't want to face the day. I can wake up tired just like anybody else. So, and I didn't have time for the morning routine. I don't have time to fit it in, blah, 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 blah. All of that stuff is normal and natural. What's happened over time is I have gotten used to it and committed to it. I never skip it, ever, ever, ever for any reason. Not because I'm a nutcase or because I'm some kind of a fanatic weirdo, because I love how it feels. I love how I feel when I'm working with a client to create their own with their words and their true passions and stuff. What I tell them is when you read the document, looking in the mirror in your own eyes with power, if it doesn't make you weep, then write it again. Because it is intended to be the ultimate expression of the truth of yourself and your relationship to the universe and the divine as you understand it right now. That'll develop and stuff over time. That's fine. But the purpose of it is to take control of your life. And the way you described it, I want to make clear it isn't so that I have to be frantically busy and freak out and work real hard. There's times when I don't do any of that. The times that I am in meditation and contemplation, or I'm doing something with joy, with the gentlest, tenderest heart I can manage at my own stage of development. All of that is embodied in, because some of the statements are about joy is I love joy with everything that I am. Joy is the love of my life and eternity. I love the grace, beauty, and brilliance that is joy with all my being. Joy is my song, my balance, and the light in my heart. So for those things to be true, that informs, instructs, and helps me in every way that I think about, talk about, and live with her. So it isn't about frantic busyness. It's not about outperforming anyone. It is a comprehensive contract of who I want to be, because what we make out of ourselves, that's all we have to take home. We came with nothing, and the only thing we're going to go back with is what we have made of ourselves.
Beautiful. Thank you. So many places we could go, and the time is just ticking, ticking, ticking. I've got a big final question for you coming up before we finish soon. So at this point, what have I not asked you that I should have, or what else is there that you really would like to share with our people?
I said earlier, it's never too late. There's no place that you've been, no mistakes you've made, no such thing. And I reiterate that, but there is a lot more to tell. 11 years after the first divine intervention, I got sick and died. And that's a whole nother story. Happened in 2018. And I was in a coma for 17 days and lost all the weight. And I looked like a concentration camp survivor. And that's a whole incredible story. And that fill up a whole hour all by itself. But what I want to assure you listening, there's nothing interesting or special about Kellan. Despite the miraculous things and invitations and dramatic stuff that's happened, every one of you listening, you're a divine, capable being, just as important, just as powerful, just as precious as I am. And I know that. And so the only purpose for sharing all this is not about me. It's an invitation for you to look at yourself with love, compassion, forgiveness, determination, joy, new eyes, recommitment, so that you can decide on purpose who you want to be and then live into that.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, yes, I'm 100% with you on that. It's a powerful invitation, and I know that at least one person will have heard that and said, "Ah, that's exactly what I needed to hear." And that can be the invitation. That can be the substitute for the 2x4s that we got. Not everybody needs to get those 2x4s. So before we get to the big final question, you kindly brought along a gift for our audience. Would you be up for saying a word about what that is?
You bet. I have a kind of an interesting sense of humor. So I have a course called Master Your Monsters. And I playing off of the monsters that we have as kids, under the bed, in the closet, that are going to scare us and so forth. I mean, they made a whole movie about that, Monsters Inc., right? And so we have those as kids, and then we grow up and realize there's nobody under the bed or in the closet. But as adults, we have our own monsters: the procrastination monster, the I have no time monster, the I'm not good enough monster, the it's not my fault monster, the if they would only, all of those kinds of sayings that are just as big and even more powerful than the monsters that we had as kids. And they show up and eat your lunch from time to time, or maybe all the time. So I created a course called Master Your Monsters. It's an audio course with 12 parts and the parts address different ones of those monsters, like I talked about, and give you ideas and things that I've learned about how to eliminate those monsters from your life, to end procrastination, to get out of living in fear, to get out of blaming others, to figure out how to prioritize and manage time so that you're doing the things you truly believe are important, and several others. So that's available, masteryourmonsters.com. And I would invite you to go there and grab it. It's free and it's good.
That's beautiful. Sometimes I think 99% of what I do as a coach is I hear people speak, and I hear one of those monsters come through their voice. And for so many of us, it's the soup that we grew up in, and it never occurs to us that there's an option, a choice. We think we have to live with them forever.
That was part of the 2x4. And the 2x4 was not only a wake up call that I could change, but that there was another option. There is another way.
Hmm.
The whole story and soup that I've been living in wasn't the only item on the menu.
Yeah. That's awesome. So y'all watching, listening, masteryourmonsters.com. It's free. It's good. If you take it, if you apply it, guaranteed your life will uplift. and it's spelled just like you'd think. So with that said, Kellan, you shared so much. I'm going to ask you one final question, if that's okay. It's an impossible question because it's so big. There's no way you could ever answer it. Would that be all right?
I'd welcome it. Let's do it.
All right. Now you've shared so much with us, and you've had such an amazing journey thus far. If you were to do the impossible thing and boil it down all the way to one thing, one piece of advice, one suggestion that would help our audience to live a more vibrant life, what is that one thing?
You're going to live with stories of defeat, of not good enough, of excuses about why everybody else is at fault. All that stuff you're going to have. If I give you one thing right now is drop the drama, get started now. You matter. So go out and do this because you know where the other road goes. The road of excuses, the road of blaming others, the road of quitting over and over again. Just love yourself, be compassionate, but get in the game.
Get in the game. I love it. All right. And then last question, Kellan. Thank you. That's beautiful what you said. What's the best way for people to reach you, to get more connected with you?
So Kellan Fluckiger is a really weird name. There's one other in the world, and it's my son. And if you look him up, he did some MMA fighting and stuff in his younger days. He was an All-American heavyweight wrestler, and he looks, you might see the family resemblance. But anyway, other than that, I'm really easy to find. So KellanFluckiger.com. I'm on many of the social media. Please connect with me. There's my Facebook link. If you'd like to connect, if I can help you in some way, reach out. Like you could say, well, I don't know. Well, okay, then I won't be able to help you. But remember, my goal is 250 million people. And if you're one of them, let's talk.
Awesome. Beautiful. Well, Kellan, I am so grateful to you for being connected as we are. So grateful to you for agreeing to be here and sharing so much with our audience. Thanks for being on the show.
You're just welcome. And again, I want to acknowledge and honor you for the work you put into creating these. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And y'all, beloved audience, thank you, because your interest in a vibrant life, in living up to your potential, in growing into more thriving, not only is that important and gives me something to do, it makes a difference in the world. It really, really does. So it's powerful. And I honor and appreciate you for having that dedication. And I appreciate that you shared this time with us. So thanks for tuning in. We will be back soon for another show. And until then, please, please, please make your life a masterpiece. Mahalo for tuning in to the Art of Vibrant Living show, y'all. I'm Daniel Aaron, and may you live with great vibrancy.